Putin's trembling next to Trump, an urgent ceasefire agreement, and the regrouping of Russian troops on the eve of Zelensky's meeting in Washington. This is TSN Online. My name is Natalia Ostrovska. Leave a like under this episode and write in the comments what you think about the deal Donald Trump offered to Ukrainians. He has already revealed its details. Let's get started. He says he has reached fundamental agreements with Putin, according to which there should be a territorial exchange between Ukraine and Russia, and he hopes that Ukraine will not refuse such a deal. These are the words of Donald Trump immediately after a brief 15-minute briefing to a loyal Fox News journalist in Alaska. In this conversation, Trump emphasized several times, Ukraine must accept these agreements and Zelensky must agree. But Trump did not specify exactly which agreements he was referring to, or what might cause a problem in Ukraine's attitude toward them. The U.S. president only assessed the likelihood of reaching a deal as 50-50. Donald Trump ruled out an immediate ceasefire between Ukraine and Russia and stated that the focus should be on a peace agreement. He wrote about this on his social network, Truth Social. I quote, "It was unanimously decided that the best way to end the terrible war between Russia and Ukraine is to reach a direct peace agreement that will put an end to the war, rather than just a ceasefire agreement, which most often does not stand the test of time," said the U.S. president. In addition, today Trump called the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky. The conversation was initially one-on-one and only later were European leaders brought in. Trump invited Zelensky to Washington. According to preliminary information, the meeting will take place as early as Monday. Zelensky said that during the call, they discussed positive signals from the American side regarding participation in guaranteeing security for Ukraine. According to him, it is important that, in order to reliably guarantee security, Europeans are involved together with the United States at every stage. After the conversation with Trump, Kyiv additionally coordinated its positions with European leaders. They agreed it is necessary to achieve real peace, one that will be lasting and not just another pause between Russian invasions. To free Ukrainian prisoners, both military and civilian, and to return the children abducted by Russia. Today, the leaders of European countries also made a joint statement. According to the statement, Ukraine will make its own decisions on its territory and must have unbreakable security guarantees in order to effectively defend its sovereignty and territorial integrity. These words were signed by European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, the presidents of France and Finland, the prime ministers of the United Kingdom, Italy and Poland, the Chancellor of Germany, and the President of the European Council. They welcomed Trump's statement that the United States is ready to provide security guarantees to Ukraine. The coalition of willing countries also emphasizes there should be no restrictions on the armed forces of Ukraine or on its cooperation with third countries. Furthermore, Russia cannot have veto power over Ukraine's path to the EU and NATO. European countries are ready to cooperate with President Trump and President Zelensky on holding a trilateral summit with Europe's support. The historic night, which drew the world's attention, passed without any agreements on Ukraine and without new sanctions for Russia. The meeting between Trump and Putin did not go according to plan from the start and ended much sooner than expected. The planned formal lunch was canceled. The negotiations lasted about 3 hours. The press briefing lasted 15 minutes. No time was allotted for questions from the press, even though they had some rather pointed ones, such as, "When will you stop killing peaceful Ukrainians?" But these questions went unanswered. Putin pretended not to hear the questions or acted as if he did not understand English. What Trump was saying to him at that moment is unknown. Let's recall how it all unfolded. Ola Koshelenko, our special correspondent in the USA, broke down the entire meeting minute by minute.
A perfectly staged show at the Elmendorf-Richardson military base airport began with great pomp. The plane carrying the President of the United States arrived first, but Trump stayed on board for a while to synchronize his arrival with Putin. They descended the stairs at the same time, greeted each other with broad smiles, and after shaking hands, walked together along the red carpet to the photo podium. The televised scene was adorned by 4 F-22 fighter jets on either side, while B-2 bombers flew overhead. The questions shouted by American journalists were either not heard by the presidents or they pretended not to hear them. Mr. Putin, did you underestimate Ukraine? President Putin, will you stop killing civilians? And although Putin's Urus limousine was waiting for him at the airfield, Trump offered him a ride. Together, sitting in the back seat of the Beast, as the US president's limousine is called, smiling and chatting, the presidents headed to the 3-on-3 negotiations. On the American side, in addition to the President, Secretary of State Rubio and Special Representative Vitkov were present in the room. On the Russian side, there were Foreign Minister Lavrov and Putin's aide Ushakov. The same scene repeated itself. Although journalists from free countries desperately shouted their questions, Trump and Putin silently posed for photos and videos. Then, for almost 3 hours behind closed doors, while correspondents were invited early into the press conference hall, where 2 podiums had been prepared for the president's speeches. It then became clear that the meeting agenda had been shortened. The lunch and the expanded format negotiations would not take place. But there was still hope to hear answers to questions at the press conference. However, it turned out to be the biggest disappointment. The presidents limited themselves to brief statements, non-confrontational, but also lacking any real results. Trump stated that some progress had been made. Putin said that he was committed to ending the war, but I quote, after the root causes of the conflict are addressed. The situation with the questions was the same. Journalists were shouting out, the presidents ignored all attempts. I have said more than once, I've repeatedly stated that for Russia, the events in Ukraine are linked to fundamental threats to our national security. Moreover, we have always considered and still consider the Ukrainian people, I have said this many times, a brotherly nation. No matter how strange it may seem under the current circumstances, we share common roots, and everything that is happening is a tragedy and a great pain for us. That is why our country is genuinely interested in putting an end to this. At the same time, we are convinced that in order for a settlement in Ukraine to be stable and long-lasting, it is necessary to eliminate all the root causes of the crisis, which have been repeatedly discussed, take into account all of Russia's legitimate interests, and restore a just balance in the sphere of security in Europe and throughout the world. I agree with President Trump, he mentioned this today, that of course Ukraine's security must also be guaranteed.
I genuinely believe that we had a very productive and indeed highly successful meeting today, which was quite beneficial for everyone involved. There were many points on which we reached agreement. Most of them, there are a few key points on which we haven't reached a final agreement yet, but there has been some progress. In other words, there is no agreement until there is a final agreement. I will call NATO soon. I'll call a few people I consider necessary, and of course I'll call President Zelensky to tell him about today's meeting. In the end, it all depends on them.
In conclusion, Trump announced the next meeting without specifics, and Putin added, next time in Moscow. To which Trump replied that the idea was interesting. After that, both presidents hurried to the airfield. Their planes, with only a slight difference in departure time, each headed to their respective capitals. From Anchorage, Alaska, United States, Olha Koshelenko, Maxim Shinkarenko. TSN 1+1.
Trump achieved nothing as a result of the summit with Putin. Such an assessment of the meeting between the American president and the Russian dictator was voiced by Trump's former national security advisor, John Bolton. According to him, these negotiations became a step for the Kremlin leader toward breaking out of international isolation. Bolton also noted that Putin avoided sanctions and a ceasefire, which Trump had sought to achieve. So the Russian dictator achieved most of what he wanted. Meanwhile, Trump achieved very little, Bolton concluded. Meanwhile, Democratic Senator Richard Blumenthal called the meeting empty talk and criticized Trump for his actions toward Putin during their meeting in Alaska. Blumenthal also reminded that Putin is a war criminal, and people in Ukraine are dying because Putin continues to kill them. The contact between Trump and Putin is being discussed on the front pages of global media with the red carpet and warm words, but without any agreements. For example, the Washington Post writes about the summit. After nearly 3 hours of negotiations, the American president and the Kremlin leader took the stage with nothing to say, Western journalists emphasize. Politico calls the meeting in Alaska a triumph for Putin. A war criminal was welcomed on American soil as a friend, not as the leader of a pariah state that invaded the territory of a sovereign country, the article states. Western media note that Putin left Anchorage without taking on any commitments regarding a ceasefire. And despite the warm welcome, Trump was unable to secure a ceasefire. At the same time, there is reportedly a preliminary agreement on a ceasefire in the air until the trilateral meeting between Trump, Zelensky, and Putin. This is what the Economist journalist Oliver Carroll writes about on social network X, citing his own sources. However, this information has already been denied by Volodymyr Zelensky's advisor, Dmytro Litvin. Under the journalist's post, he commented that, supposedly, the Ukrainian side has not heard anything about this so far. Trump may start pressuring Zelensky to make territorial concessions in order to sign a peace agreement. This is reported by Bloomberg, citing European officials. Moreover, after meeting with the Kremlin leader, the U.S. president did indeed mention an agreement that he and Putin had supposedly reached, which the Ukrainian side is expected to accept and which Zelensky must agree to. Trump does not plan to impose sanctions against Moscow for now because, as he says, he got along very well with Putin and is postponing this issue for 2 or 3 weeks. All night, while Trump was trying to negotiate peace in Ukraine with Putin, the Russians were shelling Sumy, and in total, they launched 85 attack drones and struck with ballistic missiles across Ukraine. The drones came from 6 different directions at once, including from temporarily occupied Crimea. 61 enemy drones were shot down or suppressed by air defense forces in the north and east of the country. This time, the enemy's attacks targeted the frontline areas of Sumy, Donetsk, Chernihiv, and Dnipropetrovsk regions. The Air Force reports that drone and missile strikes were recorded at 12 locations. So, as I already mentioned, Sumy is recovering after the night attack by Russian terrorists. At midnight, there were loud explosions in the city. In the evening, the city was attacked by a drone. The central market was hit. A fire broke out at the site of the strike, igniting market stalls. In total, about 20 were damaged or destroyed. At that time, there were no people inside, but a woman who happened to be near the impact site was injured. An hour after the attack, another explosion was heard in the city. In the Kherson region, Russian shelling claimed the lives of 3 people, and another 12 were wounded. War criminals shelled Kherson and Mykylsk with artillery and attacked Zelenivka with drones. Rescuers extinguished 12 fires despite the danger of repeated shelling. An apartment building and 14 private houses were damaged. 1 person was killed and 3 were wounded as a result of shelling in the Dnipropetrovsk region. The enemy launched missile strikes on the outskirts of the regional center. 1 man was killed and another was hospitalized in serious condition. A truck, a van, and a car were damaged. 2 more people were injured in the Nikopol district. There, an agricultural company and 5 apartment buildings were destroyed. A private house was damaged, and 2 more caught fire. Moderator, in the coming days, the occupying army may intensify attacks on Ukraine. This was stated by Volodymyr Zelensky. According to him, the invaders' goal is to create more favorable political circumstances for talks on the international stage. At the same time, for the 2nd day in a row, the armed forces of Ukraine have been successfully holding back the occupiers' pressure in extremely difficult areas near Pokrovsk. Zelensky stated this after hearing the report from the commander-in-chief. The Russians, however, are not stopping their pressure and have made some advances in the Donetsk region. The enemy army has entered Popiv Yar, is also trying to expand its control near Novyi Shakovye, and has intensified its offensive toward Ivanivka. In the Siversk direction, the Russians have entered Ivano-Darivka. This was reported by the Dnipro Operational Strategic Group. And in the afternoon, Russian occupiers tried to break through to Pokrovsk on motorcycles. Operators from the Hostry Kartusi unit did not allow the bikers to approach the city. They were met by Mavics, FPV drones, and heavy bombers. Right now, the enemy is putting the most pressure on the Pokrovsk area. In total, since the beginning of the previous day, our defenders have stopped 45 assaults in this sector. Earlier, the General Staff reported that Pokrovsk had been cleared of Russian saboteurs. Painful blows to Russia's wallet. The General Staff has calculated the losses suffered by the aggressor country from the shelling of its critical infrastructure. Moderator. Since the beginning of 2025, the corresponding amount has reached over $74 billion, which is approximately 4% of the annual GDP. Moreover, every 10th attack took place at a distance of more than 1,000 kilometers from our border. This refers in particular to oil refineries, storage facilities, oil pumping stations, terminals, and ports. That is why the government of the terrorist country held an emergency meeting on Thursday with representatives of the largest oil companies in order to decide together with the main oil executives how to proceed, because fuel prices on the Russian market have already soared by 50% since the beginning of the year. Meanwhile, profits from oil sales abroad, on the contrary, are falling. Against this backdrop, Russia's budget deficit is the highest it has been in the past 3 decades. It was with this kind of baggage that Vladimir Putin flew to Alaska to test the waters regarding the lifting or easing of sanctions, according to Bloomberg. So after the meeting, Putin was reassured that there would be no new sanctions, at least for a while. That's what the US president promised him. Meanwhile, the head of the United States advises Ukraine to make a deal with Russia and, for now, does not plan to impose sanctions against Moscow. After his meeting with Putin, Trump gave another interview to Fox News, where he revealed a bit more about the first meeting in years with the Kremlin leader. He rated the summit 10 out of 10. According to him, they supposedly got along very well with the Kremlin chief. That's why, in the near future, he won't be imposing sanctions as he had previously threatened. He said he would consider sanctions on buyers of Russian oil in 2 or 3 weeks. Trump did not want to admit on which issue he and Putin failed to reach an agreement. The meeting between Trump and Putin is being discussed on the front pages of global media, with a red carpet and warm words, but without any agreements. That's how the Washington Post describes the summit. After nearly 3 hours of negotiations, the American president and the Kremlin leader took the stage with nothing to say, Western journalists emphasize. Politico calls the meeting in Alaska a triumph for Putin. A war criminal was welcomed on American soil as a friend, not as the leader of a pariah state that invaded the territory of a sovereign country, the article states. Western media note that Putin left Anchorage without making any commitments to a ceasefire. And despite the warm welcome, Trump was unable to secure a ceasefire. At the same time, there is reportedly a preliminary agreement on a ceasefire in the air until the three-way meeting between Trump, Zelensky, and Putin. This was reported by The Economist journalist Oliver Carroll on social network X, citing his own sources. However, this information has already been denied by Volodymyr Zelensky's advisor, Dmytro Lytvyn. He commented under the journalist's post, saying that supposedly the Ukrainian side hasn't heard anything about this yet. He was grinding his teeth in frustration. Body language experts, including clinical and forensic psychologist from the U.S. Dr. John Paul Harrison, analyzed the meeting between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. In his opinion, the U.S. president behaved quite differently than he did at meetings with other world leaders. He was rather warm and friendly, although he still tried to compete non-verbally with Putin for dominance. Specifically, they sat with their legs apart and their arms folded. At the same time, the expert noticed that it was difficult for the American president to listen to Putin until the end. And in the end, Trump couldn't completely hide his disappointment with the meeting.
Both were demonstrating a position of strength. It didn't look like a conflict, but each showed with their body, "I'm in charge here."
In charge.
That's where things got very interesting to me. Putin
Was simply reading a prepared speech without the kind of emotion you'd expect in such a situation. But Trump was different. From what I saw, he looked disappointed. He had less energy than usual. It seemed to me that he was upset. He was grinding his teeth. Sometimes he does that when he's angry or irritated. So, in my opinion, things didn't go the way he wanted. At least judging by his body language.
And what did you notice about Putin's behavior? What do you think? Will he dare to attend a trilateral meeting? Will he look the Ukrainian president in the eye? Write about it in the comments. And don't forget to like the video. It's really important to us. One of the topics surrounding the meeting between Putin and Trump that was actively discussed on social media was the height of the Russian dictator. In all the videos, he doesn't appear much shorter than Trump. And let's note that Trump's official height is 190 centimeters, while Putin's is only 170. Although in many photos, Putin is even shorter than Medvedev, whose height is 163 centimeters. So those who watched the broadcast of the meeting speculated that Putin was given some kind of special device, like an exoskeleton under his pants from the knees down, so that he wouldn't look even less imposing next to Trump. This is also evidenced by the dictator's strange walk and his shifting from foot to foot during the meeting, which social media users noticed. Sometimes it might even seem like he's walking on tiptoes. It has long been known that at meetings with various politicians, Putin wears specially made platform shoes that add 10 to 12 centimeters to his height. During the so-called Trump summit with Mr. Pooh, the Russian dictator was handed a personal letter. According to Reuters sources, it was written at the White House by the First Lady of the United States, Melania Trump. She mentioned the abducted Ukrainian children there. Trump personally handed the Kremlin leader a letter from his wife during their talks. The detailed contents have not yet been disclosed. Notably, the International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant for Vladimir Putin precisely because of the illegal deportation of Ukrainian children.